Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to our Green-Red Dialogue. I have the pleasure to welcome you in the name of the Green European Foundation. We are going to have this debate together with our partner in Catalonia, the Foundation Nous Horizons. And I'm really happy, well, not only because of my few of you know, of my nationality, I'm quite combined with the German election and what has happened now. But first of all, also that we can have this European debate on what impact has this election in Germany for Europe, for Spain, for Catalonia, and what is coming out of this. We have had recently now this election, but now is the question, what will be the future of Germany, but also which impact will have this on the other countries. So we are really happy that we have really three interesting speakers today. My point is only to wish you really happy and really interesting debate on this. And I will pass already over to my colleague Marc Rios from the Foundation Nous Horizons to follow up with this. So, Marc, please, the floor is yours.
Muchas gracias, Susan. Gracias por estar aquí con nosotros.
Thank you, Susanne, for being here with us. Welcome. Thank you for being here in this Green Dialogue. And it'll deal with what happens after Merkel. We'll learn more about it. Some days ago, we knew that we didn't have a Merkel anymore. Today, we're guessing what may happen. That's why we have three people that will help us analyze this new stage. I would like to, first of all, say for you to know that this Zoom broadcast is being recorded. It's like the cookies. You all have to know that cookies are there, and this is being recorded. We have three people that can complement the analysis of the German elections. First of all, I would like to thank German Reinhard Bütikofer. He's a member of parliament of the Greens, the president of the Green Party. He deeply knows the German context, and he's here to tell us in the first person from a political perspective.
Todo lo que tenga que aportarnos. Muchas gracias.
Thank you for being here. Secondly, we have Carme Colomina. She's a researcher of CIDOB, particularly in global policies. She normally collaborates in different media, like the press, TV, etc. And María-Paz López, she's a journalist, and for some years, she's the correspondent in Berlin of La Vanguardia newspaper. So I'd like to thank you for being here, available for this debate. With no further ado, just to determine how we will organize this session, we will make the first three interventions. First, Reinhard, Carme, and María-Paz. And since we will get questions through YouTube or Zoom when your interventions are over, I would like to suggest some considerations with respect to what you have said and the questions and comments that arrive from our members of the audience, people that are listening to us. So we will be very strict with respect to our schedule so that everyone can go back to your respective commitments. Thank you once again, and Reinhard, you have the floor.
Thank you, Marc. Thank you to the organizers, to Susanna and all the others. A pleasure to be with you and to have this exchange. The dust has not fully settled after the election on Sunday, but bit by bit, we get a much clearer picture of what is brewing. The foreign policy dimension and the European policy dimension did not play a major role throughout the campaign. in some of the most broadly viewed and most prominent debates, foreign policy and Europe didn't even pop up as a topic. But certainly the formation of a new government will have quite substantial impacts for European and foreign policy. Before I try to describe some of the expectations that I would harbor, maybe it's adequate to just give you a few hints as to what the novel character of this election really is, because I believe that it opens a new era in German party political history. This is probably going to be the first election that will result in a three-partite governing coalition. Hypothetically, there could be a new so-called grand coalition cooperation between socialists and Christian Democrats under the leadership of the former. So an inverse große Koalition, but I don't think this is very probable at all. They hate each other as best they can, and the public hates the idea too. Große Koalition has governed for 12 of the last 16 years, and the Germans have basically had it. So since the left did miserably badly in the election, they barely survived in parliament, even though they did not cross the 5% threshold. The hypothetical option of a coalition between the socialists and the left and the Greens is not possible just arithmetically. So that falls by the wayside, and that leaves basically two theoretical options. One would be a coalition between the conservatives and the liberals and the Greens, and the other could be a coalition between the socialists and the liberals and the Greens. If I look at climate policy and look at European and in particular also foreign policy, I don't see that many distinctions between the conservatives and the socialists. That would make it hard to differentiate, but clearly there are other issues that play a relevant role for the Green constituencies on which there is memorable difference. Social policy, for instance, minimum wage. Socialists and us have both advocated to enact a raise of the minimum wage to 12 euro. The conservatives are completely opposed to that idea. So issues like that, there is a distinction. But even more important than the programmatic stances, I would say, is the fact that the conservative party family, which is a combination, as you will know, between the CDU, the Christian Democratic Union, and its smaller sister party from Bavaria, the Christian Social Union. We call it the Union in German, in the German political arena. This political family is falling apart as we speak. Their leader handed them the worst ever result in their history since the end of the Second World War. He lost roughly 8% of the vote, and he made such a weak showing as a leader, that he is now fighting for his survival. I don't think he will be able to hold on to his position for very long. And when you then look at the party behind that unfortunate person, Mr. Laschet, you will find that there are hardly two people who share the same views. So they're so disunited that it's hardly imaginable to even have meaningful negotiations. So I think even though formally nobody has excluded the hypothetical option that such a tripartite coalition under conservative leadership could also happen, I think in reality, it's not an option at all. A vast majority of the German public expects this will not happen, and some, I don't know, 95% of Green voters just the same want to see a coalition with the socialists. So I will argue on the basis of the assumption that there will be a so-called traffic light coalition. The parties all have their own special colors, so the socialists are red and the liberals are yellow, and we are the Greens, obviously. So this traffic light coalition will probably be the end result. And it will be a very special traffic light coalition, however, if you compare it, for instance, with some experience that we've had with similar combinations in some of the German Länder. In Rheinland-Pfalz, for instance, we've had such a combination for a number of years, but there the socialists have been and still are a dominant major party, whereas the liberals and the Greens are two small junior parties that just bring enough to the table to create an overall majority. The logic of the new coalition on the federal level will be different because the liberals and the Greens together will have more seats in the Bundestag than the socialist group will have. So the socialist group will be weaker. Never ever has a probable chancellor had fewer votes supporting his claim to the chancellor's office than Mr. Scholz has, which means that the balance between those three forces will also be different. We recall, many of us in the German Green Party recall that in 1998, when we formed a coalition with Gerd Schröder, at the time, socialists had more than 40% of the vote. We had just 6.7%. And Gerd Schröder, the chancellor at the time, famously said, well, I'm the cook, they are the waiter. I'm cooking the policy and they have to dish it out to the customers. So there was a very hierarchical understanding of the relationship between the two parties. We managed to be the cook on the nuclear phase-out and on the citizenship law of the land, but on many policies, in many dimensions, indeed, the social democratic leadership called the shots. This is not going to be the relationship in the new context. The two junior partners have a stronger leverage. So what is in store for the rest of Europe and for international relations? It is hard to sort that out because the substantive negotiations haven't even started. And there are many contradictions between the starting points of the three different parties. I would argue, for instance, that Scholz is much closer to the economic policies that France has advocated within the European Union than Merkel has ever been. So from that angle, people who want to find an opening for euro bonds, for instance, could hope that possibly Scholz would open a little door for that. On the other hand, the liberals pursue a fiscal policy or advocate a fiscal policy for Europe that is more on the lines of the Dutch Premier Rutte, the leader of the New Hanseatic League, who doesn't at all want to go a single small step in that direction. So this is just one example for the contradictions that you will find. On other issues, I would say that the liberals, the interesting fact is from issue to issue, you will have different combinations of forces. There are issues where the Greens and the Liberals will form a front vis-a-vis the Socialists. There will be issues where the Socialists and us will be closer together, and there will also be issues where the Liberals and the Socialists will be closer together. So this is going to be a very complicated relationship. On industrial policy, the Liberals and us will both advocate much stronger innovation efforts with regard to the digital transformation. The Socialists have been among those parties that have been dragging their feet on that count. We both will push hard. On the European Green Deal, we will, of course, be the major advocates for a strong strong German contribution. The Socialists are modestly open to that. The Liberals have a lot of misgivings about that. From all the parties that ran, with the exception of the far-right Alternative für Deutschland, the Liberals were analyzed to have the weakest proposals on climate policy and environmental policy. On social issues, I mentioned minimum wage, social inclusiveness. Probably the Socialists and the Greens will be more open than Merkel ever was. Scholz has advocated completing the banking union, which is something where Merkel dragged her feet. The Liberals have misgivings about that. We would be very much in favor of pushing that agenda. So you can go around and look at different perspectives of different policies. The Socialists, as well as us, would advocate own resources for the European Union. The Liberals are reluctant in that regard. So that is to be slugged out over the next, let's say, 2 months or so. On foreign policy, interestingly, the Liberals and us have more in common. The Liberals and us both advocate foreign policies that are not just automotive foreign policies, as some people have quipped about Merkel. They have taken strong stances on human rights, for instance, in the context of Turkey, but also in the context of China. The German Greens and the German Liberals are two parties that are very critical of Merkel's China policy and would want to move in a more critical direction. Last point, I believe that you should expect from Berlin in the future a more European approach. What do I mean when I say that? I am thinking, for instance, of Nord Stream 2, where the German government insisted on a project against the majority in the European Parliament, in the Council, and in the Commission, basically pursued a Germany first policy. There are other examples where Germany under Merkel has mostly looked for its own interests and only in the second approach, maybe also for the European interest. The experience is that the relative strength of Germany has been deteriorating, even though the country is still the major force within the European Union, but its relative strength vis-a-vis others is waning. And because of that, there will be an imperative for the new German government to seek more alignment with European partners if they want to move the needle at all. So I think one positive expectation that you could formulate is Germany looking more for the interest of its neighbors. I stop here.
Muchas gracias, Reinhard.
Thank you very much, Reinhard. Carme, you have the floor. Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you for having invited me and for allowing me to participate in this debate. I fully agree with what Reinhard said till now and his analysis. I reckon that this new political era, post-Merkel era, is born fragmented in Germany. The results probably have not been as concluding as some would have expected, but it's born with a will, with a taste for change. Is the first reading of these results. To me, at a moment like this, where we have a 78% of participation, when we are speaking about crisis or a time of crisis of representation, well, it's a real and clear will to go to the polls to express an opinion. There's a generational reading of results with young voters in voting Greens and Liberals, and this proves that there is a movement that is ongoing, and that this political fragmentation that right now is evidenced and that is stated in Germany follows the lines of other victories of social democrats that we've seen in the last months in Scandinavia, for example. These have been victories that carried or entailed a coalition, but this is the new reality in the European election panorama. My doubt is, however, how far can this political renewal process go at a moment in which Chancellor Merkel has been personifying consensus, or at least the minimum common denominator of a consensus. And she's clearly showing the programmatic agenda of Merkel, well, going from one party to the other in some sort of a catch-all, forcing now discussions of a very ideological nature when forming these new governments, or the possible coalitions that may stem from these negotiations. Maybe after flexible agreements, as Reinhard expressed, for some topics, they would, well, Greens and Liberals would meet more easily, and in others, they wouldn't. The same as in Europe, we are now facing an Europe of flexible alliances and maybe this will happen in this new negotiation in period in Germany. What we are observing after this fragmentation is that we are observing weaker leaderships, because they don't have the same, or they don't stem from big majorities. And well, at the moment of truth, this creates some sort of void of leadership in Europe, an important leadership that had been clearly occupied by Chancellor Merkel during all these years. And now the European Union is going to, be in a standby position, in spite of the fact that from Brussels, we have to admit that there is a certain euphoria from the social democrat lines. We can easily see that David Sassoli from the European Parliament congratulated Olaf Scholz. The same was done by the Spanish president. And if there is a coalition, a Jamaica or a semaphore coalition, and the socialists reach the first position, well, we'll see a change in the struggle for the institutional powers in Brussels, and obviously this will change the political panorama, but we are facing a long negotiation that later on will be followed by another key electoral process, such as the French presidential elections the next spring. This is what makes me fear that at a moment of change and needs of geopolitical acceleration, as what we are living in Europe right now, we fall in these standbys in the Franco-German axis that won't really define where Europe is heading to and where we will be heading to in the next months. And this was clearly stated, the composition of the next German government will have direct consequences on the big topics of debate open in the European Union, from the consolidation of next generation use funds, if they can have a continuity, something that liberals are not very happy with. The debate about fiscality and the creation of new taxes to improve own resources, where liberals are quite critical, with the debate about the minimum European wage, the mutualization of debt. They have not always seen this with pleasure. So there are many open cases towards the future that depend on the final colors of this German coalition first. Secondly, after this, we'll see periods of negotiation, intense moments where we will also see that without discussing the German leadership, because of the political weight, the economic weight, and demographic weight, it's clear. But what capacity of consensus generation we will have after the new German government? And it's true that in the last few years, Angela Merkel, due to her character, had achieved a degree of authority recognized by the different member states to lead these negotiations, because she took all the necessary time. She didn't really care that summits could be lengthened till the early morning, but in order to listen to all voices, and she generated consensus that Macron cannot really do. Who can take this position? Who can show an alternative? Well, seen from the south of Europe in this case, well, I think that Mario Draghi could have a recognized authority as strong as Merkel, probably, because he's been there in the most critical moments of the last economic and financial crisis in Europe, but the German stability won't really help. But in this new Europe that is being shaped up through regional alliances, and the South has had real problems when trying to organize or become organized and having joint agendas when negotiating in Brussels. And we have to see if this will generate changes or not. And maybe I can stop here, but let me just finish by saying that during all this time, during the last 16 years, Merkel was able to achieve a consolidations as a contention dam for the good and for the bad. The Merkel times, not only her power, but her moderation when making decisions, have involved or have imposed a style of crisis management. And we're at a moment in which Europe does not only need to manage a crisis, but generate a radical change. And here's where we need to know how strong and how coherent the next German government will be after the negotiations, because we are at a moment of geostrategic and strategic consideration of the European Union, going beyond this pragmatic vision that has been imposed during all these years, the Merkel era in Europe, and an opportunity, clear opportunity, because if we follow the big topics that we've heard during the German electoral campaign, there's a similarity, a parallelism between the pending topics of the German agenda and the pending topics of the European topics, with the green transformation and the digital transformation. And this is a real opportunity, having the same needs in Europe and in Germany to coordinate agendas in order to create a better political ambition, considering these new challenges. Thank you. Thank you, Carme. María-Paz, you have the floor now. Well, thank you. Good afternoon. I am so pleased to be here with all of you. In Berlin, well, we have some movement. And I fully agree with the fact that the most likely situation, though it's always risky to make prognosis, is that the chancellor will be a social democrat, because in spite of the fact that both Greens and Liberals don't indicate their preferences, well, Liberals showed, well, in their calendar of contacts, they said first, the Greens said first CDU and then SPD. But even so, the Greens, in spite of the fact that we, well, all know that they have a weakness for social democrats, and Howard is the other co-leader of the Greens, together with Annalena Baerbock. Well, he said that we have to talk to everyone. He has a very positive experience together with Hofstein, well, talking with governments that include CDU or the Danish minority, which is also conservative. So he's not closing to the possibility that there is a Jamaica coalition, a semaphore, traffic light coalition. This can be also a tactic, like the Rotesocken tactics that was used to fight against the red danger. Well, here is the way to scare Scholz about the traffic light danger. It's a way to push harder and get more concessions. This leads us back to the topic that Reinhard said before. This three-party or tripartite coalition will be a coalition where the three partners are quite equal, quite balanced, and the chancellor will be a nominal chancellor, but will be 1/3 of the group. And another element that could make us think that the chancellor will be Scholz is that on Tuesday, in the constitution of the parliamentary groups, in the conservative group, which, well, CDU and CSU have all their elements separated, except from the youth groups and the parliamentary group, which is also joint. Well, in this parliamentary group, the re-election of the current of the leader in House, Carlos Tolnashe, was renewed for 6 months, not for 1 year. And this is like a hint that seems to show an anticipation. We'll go to the opposition, maybe then 6 months will require a remodelation of the team. So traffic light coalition maybe is quite clear, though there may be some changes. What we have, well, I'm not going to repeat what has been said, because I basically agree with the differences that exist between FDP and the Greens about some aspects, and then also the scarcity of data that we've had during the election. So I'm not going to elaborate on that, but definitely I would like to say that what can be foreseen from Berlin towards the south of Europe probably is something better. In the last mandate of Merkel, well, I've seen that well, there's been a different perspective, of different understanding towards the south, understanding the situations in both Spain, Portugal, Italy, and Greece. I will talk about that chronologically. When there was a negotiation of the post-pandemic recuperation funds, well, this self-called, well, some of them achieved benefits from some of the tax. Oh, anyway, well, these frugal fund groups were pushing against the scheme created by the President von der Leyen about the recuperation funds. Germany, the German Chancellor, and her Social Democrat finance minister understood that this could not be approached the same way as during the Eurozone crisis or the Greek sovereign debt. Now we had to support the most affected countries in the south, Spain, Italy, and Greece, because otherwise, well, they won't be able to have countries to sell their products. That was the maximum defense Merkel always talked about beating back, I think she says, and that was what it was. It was interesting to see how the German public opinion accepted that we have to understand or share the funds, otherwise Europe will fail. Well, this was a moment, and a previous moment that was relevant was 2015, when we got the arrival of refugees from Afghanistan, and the German Chancellor I went to Budapest to cover that story. The interesting thing here was that all of a sudden Germany discovered that. For many years, this problem had existed in Spain, in Italy, in Lampedusa, in Greece. Since in the north this was not happening, they didn't really understand, but this was now happening in Germany, and we have all to run to solve the problem. We had to hurry to solve the problem. So this component of the migratory zone as a European element was discovered by Germany, and this is good because it's here to stay, and well, we understand the situation a lot better. In order to finish, I would like to say that, in fact, this three-party coalition, probably led by Social Democrats, will help the European integration within a certain order and degree. And in that respect, it's good news. And I will stop here. I wait for your questions now. Well, excellent. Thank you very much to the three of you. To tell you the truth, well, there are so many things to think about and so many questions. I would like to generate some questions to the three of you, and you can answer the question you feel more connected with. Some of them are more for Reinhard and others for Carme and Maria, but each one of you can answer the way you want. There's an element that it would be good for Reinhard to clarify, because in spite of the fact that we are all a bit German in Europe, because we like it or because we have to, and we know some things about the German politics, but maybe you could give us some differences between liberals and Greens in terms of climate emergency, or in social terms that or whatever you consider most adequate. Because when we transfer things to Spain, liberals and Greens, here we do not have an equivalent of liberals. For us, it's not such thing. Well, Ciudadanos say that they are liberals. Clearly, they are not. I don't think they are very equivalent to the German liberal group. So we should determine the differences between Greens and liberals, and if these differences can help or blur the creation of a new government, how they will influence in these relations. The second question is, well, we all have the memories of the red and green government who was the foreign affairs minister, and I would like to ask you if you consider that there are some ministries or some key elements in the government that maybe the Greens should, participate in. And no, it's a delicate question. Well, we should determine the priorities in the government. Also, there is a second question that maybe it's a more general question. Evidently, the European dimension is there. It's a very intense debate because we don't really know who will be leading the government, because obviously the special people can have special influences in the European policies from Germany. But I would like you to tell us the role of Germany in Europe. You have quite well described what it means that Merkel is not there, for the good or for the bad. She's given a stability to a part of the European politics. In Afghanistan, it makes it more evident. There's a stage where Europe, considering this Afghan situation, the relations between the US and China also sketch a new position of Germany, and therefore of Europe, which is new. So far, we had a model that was Merkel, and this may change. I know it's complex, but maybe you can give us some comments about that. And another question here is, in one way or another, if with the Greens that they have a very good, had a good results. But Social Democrats are very happy because, they have, well, all the Greens have also have had very good results. So they will be part of the government of Germany. And won't it be, well, if the green agenda will be a green situation only, will we have a green agenda? Because this will have a sure effect on the agenda of the southern countries. Spain has a change towards an eco-transition, which is still not there, and the next generation funds will have to help us. But it's not same to feel the breath of a government that has a green agenda, or maybe just see this diluted in a general modernization where we don't insist on a sustainable model. Well, I would like to ask you more, but I'm sure that you have lots of answers to give us, and we'll follow the same order of interventions. Reinhard, maybe you could tell us more about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark, for your questions. I'm not sure I'm fully capable of answering even half of them, but I'll give it a shot. Let me start with your first question pertaining to differences between the Liberals and the Greens. As I said already, we are explicitly pursuing a climate policy that wants to force Germany onto a 1.5 degree climate path, meaning we want Germany to implement policies that will allow the country to contribute to a pushback against climate change that would limit the warming to max 1.5 degrees. Now, this is extremely ambitious. Some scientists tell us that even our policies are not guaranteed, if they would be fully implemented, to lead to such a result. But clearly on that count, the Liberals are the extreme opposite. Their ambition is very low, and they oppose a lot of the practical proposals that we're making. So, for instance, we're advocating a speed limit of 130 kilometers. That would contribute to having fewer traffic accidents and death, but it would also contribute to climate. The Liberals reject that. We advocate phasing out the internal combustion engine by 2030, meaning no new cars with an internal combustion engine would be allowed onto the market after 2030. The Liberals are rejecting that. We advocate finalizing the phase out of coal in the energy generation by the year 2030. The Liberals oppose that. The official position of the government is so far that this will take until 2038. So there are major differences, and to give you a general idea, I would say the Liberals are in favor of green industrial innovation. They are in favor of technological solutions, but they're not in favor of social innovation. They're not in favor of new rules that sort of shape the trajectory more forcefully. So they always attack us as the party that tells citizens how to live. And we argue that to fight against climate change is defending the freedom of the next generations. They argue that not overdoing it is defending the freedom of the people that live today. So that's a very, very generic distinction. Then on social issues, there's a clear distinction. We want to, for instance, to lift the sanctioning of people who are under the regime of the labor market reforms, the Hartz IV reforms. These people, if they don't apply for jobs, they can be sanctioned. We advocate that these sanctions should be dropped. That's not the liberal position. We advocate, as I said, a minimum wage. They object to the very idea. We argue for a so-called Kindergrundsicherung, a basic social protection scheme for all kids that give the same benefit to all families for their kids, regardless of social status. Presently, rich people get better gratifications to look for their kids than poor people. So these kind of transformations, we want to have an insurance system that is called Bürgerversicherung, a citizens insurance system that treats everybody just the same, industrial employees and public officials. That is something that they oppose. So there are very clear distinctions there. We are in favor of shaping an industrial policy that pushes for a transformation. They would rather argue that this is something that should be done by the market itself. So they adhere to this old-fashioned market ideology. They are fiscal conservatives. We not that much. For instance, there is a rule, a constitutional rule preventing the government from borrowing too much in order to keep fiscal stability. We advocate a change of the rule to exclude infrastructure investment from that rule, because we argue infrastructure investment is certainly not wasteful spending. This is something that comes with a benefit long term, so it should not be hampered by this rule. The liberals object to that. Just a few distinctions that every German knows of. And at the moment, of course, we are looking at ways of possibly bridging those distinctions, which will be a very difficult task. Your second question was about governing priorities. I think it's obvious that we want to have the responsibility for enacting the eco-social industrial transformation of the country. So the climate policy, the environmental policies, the pertinent social policies that make that an acceptable proposition also for unemployed people and so on, people that are less well off, all of that we want to be responsible for implementing. That's our number one priority. Secondly, there is a certain tendency to say, look, the finance ministry is extremely powerful. It has a particularly powerful role in the cabinet. Without the finance ministry, it's hard to distribute the funds for different change policy adequately. The finance ministry has a very strong role in the European on the European theater, so maybe we should go for the finance ministry. That's a very contentious bone with the liberals. They want to take control of that too. And of course, there's also an issue with the foreign ministry, but at the moment, we're not discussing the ministries, the distribution of ministries. You're not supposed to do that, and I think we should stick to that. And then one One third question that you raised with regard to China. It's interesting to note the differences that you will find if you compare electoral platforms from the different democratic parties this year and 4 years ago. 4 years ago, China was rarely even mentioned in those electoral platforms. And if it was, once or twice at the most, it was mentioned as an economic powerhouse. This year, China is mentioned much more frequently, much more in depth, and the socialists and the liberals and us have all advocated, for instance, creating a European response to China's Belt and Road Initiative. We have all advocated supporting more strongly Taiwan's democracy. We have all advocated standing up in defense of human rights with regard to Xinjiang and Hong Kong in particular. So that is not signaling that Germany's foreign policy vis-a-vis China will turn on the heel. But even if you just deviate 5 degrees after a certain while, you will end up somewhere completely different from where the ship was originally going.
Bien, Carme.
Excellent. Carme.
Bueno, yo creo que Reinhard ya ha
I think
explicado
that Reinhard perfectly explained the differences between liberals and Greens. But I believe that even if the traffic light coalition is confirmed, well, all the European debates after the financial instruments and their continuity, well, the Ministry of Finances should be in the hands of Christian Linders, or should be in the hands of, or I don't know, or maybe they invent a macro minister of economic transition and climate transition. Maybe it should be in the hands of Habeck. Obviously, being the same government coalition, I think that the reading of the story would be different. That's the first question I have in my mind. But I agree, and I share the analysis made by María-Paz, that the story had already changed in Brussels with the coronavirus crisis. Clearly, in fact, there is a capacity of reaction and learning from the errors made during the economic crisis and the financial crisis that makes the community crisis be quicker and stronger level of funding during the first months of the coronavirus. And this change of the story is not happening in Brussels without the approval of Chancellor Merkel, because it's friends in Germany, the first ones who talk about creating this fund of 500,000 million euro that evolved in the next generation. So this story was there, and this leads us to observe this idea of the big coalition. This was something intrinsic to the work in Brussels and the distribution of powers in Brussels. And probably if we talk about the State of the Union speech made by Ursula von der Leyen in the European Parliament on the 15th, well, it had some social democrat nuances that didn't really quite match with her own agenda. Then there's a clear evolution of the distorts of the rhetorics and the need of creating or having social policies after seeing the deep inequalities that were created after the economic and financial crisis. This on the one hand. On the other, foreign policy. Well, I think that German foreign policy is based on big consensus. Ultimately, there are no deep discussions. First of all, it's quite revealing to see that during the electoral campaign, foreign policy in Europe in particular, that was not so obvious. But if someone has different proposals, well, we should see Greens being more innovative and more critical than with the foreign policy we've had till now. And Reinhard had already mentioned the defense of human rights in Xinjiang, for example, but also the big final and chaotic failure of the military deployment in Afghanistan and how much that can affect in the near future the other foreign mission that Germany has in Mali, for example, where they are holding a full tension situation just to accompany the French. That's a very European debate when talking about strategic capacity and defense. For Germany, well, this had always been important, to count on Brits to see the defensive role that should be developed by the European Union. Well, the exit of the UK changes the balance, and Germany doesn't like to depend on France, who has a more assertive vision with respect to military operations abroad. And this obviously has dragged till now this lack of consensus within the European Union. And at the same time, I believe that this very pragmatic vision that the Merkel government has had, this approach, this pragmatic approach with respect to commercial interests and the energy dependence, the relationship existing between the relation of Germany with Russia and China, this is what actually has ended up dragging the European Union and this deep difficulty that they have to have a common vision with respect to how to relate to Russia or with China, beyond the fact that the official documents clearly express that China is a systemic rival, but the awareness of an interdependence and economic dependence actually weakens any other political attempt. And here, well, we say that Germany is a heavyweight partner that can contribute to clarify where the European Union is positioned in this new geopolitical reality. And well, and things go the way we expected. As you, Mark, said before, the Greens will end up having the Ministry of Foreign Policy with Joschka Fischer. Well, we could at least have a different approach from what we have had in the last few years. Well, I have written different, I have written down some things. I wouldn't like to repeat the same points, but I agree with the fact that in this campaign, we haven't talked about Europe or foreign policy, but it's not so strange because ultimately in no campaign voters are so interested in what's happening abroad. They think about more immediate and closer problems to their daily reality. So in that respect, this is not surprising, considering that this country is a country of exports and, well, they want to pacify well, things abroad to be able to sell cars, sell whatever. The automotive policy of Chancellor Merkel, well, there's a tradition in German governments. In that respect, we haven't talked much about foreign policy. I would also like to mention the distribution of ministries that, well, due to a matter of elegance, we cannot say that this is what's happening, but in reality, this is what's happening, because even Robert Habeck just said that we cannot talk about this type of decisions. Well, the reality is that Greens, well, haven't had such a great result. It's been the best historical result, nearly double with respect to the past elections. But let's think that in April they had been 28% in the different surveys, and the different errors made by Annalena Baerbock, and also a certain campaign of exaggerated attacks by certain members of the press, of the media, and well, Annalena Baerbock has been weakened, and well, there's been other, well, he might be the vice chancellor, even if she was the candidate, and heading this macro ministry mentioned by Carme, maybe heading economic transition, heading climate change, etc. And actually, Kristalina will not reject or would not refuse the Ministry of Finances, because this is the way they think that they can satisfy their electoral promises they've made to their voters. And in the historical memory of the party, we can see that in the last coalition where they participated with Angela Merkel in the second government, well, they were happy to accept the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which is a ministry with great prestige, but that ultimately, well, has no internal power. And well, it's really accepted that negotiation. And the next legislation, well, they disappeared from the Bundestag. So they've been out of the Bundestag from the year 2013 to the year 2017. And this is a deep wound in a party that's hard to fix. And Lindner has it very clear when negotiations were broken for the attempt of a semaphore coalition, that because, well, he wasn't sure that he would achieve his objectives, his goals. And well, he wants to do what he wants to do. And this goes through the Ministry of Finance. I cannot imagine how he cannot get it, or they cannot get it, because it's just a matter of threatening by and they say, well, we'll support Laschet. That threat will be enough. Making politics fiction is quite clear. But the only thing that is difficult for the ecologists, this is a party that evidently, well, ecologism, pacifism is there, feminism is there. That's why they decided to have a woman as their candidate. But if now we ultimately see that the big ministries are occupied by men, and Annalena Baerbock is separated and taken to the Foreign Affairs Ministry, well, it'll be difficult to explain to the young voters. Let's see how this can be solved. I would like to add something else here. Yes, China. You talked about China. Well, China is an issue in foreign policy that the next government will change a bit. Not radically, because this is a market for the Germans that cannot be touched. We have to strike a balance between the defense of the automobile sector and the defense of human rights. This will always be there. But obviously, the new government, the new executive, should be more firm with and stronger with against China. Chancellor Merkel went to China on a yearly basis, surrounded by entrepreneurs. Well, taking the widow of the dissident who recently died. Well, that was her kind of behavior. And I think that I said all I had to say. Thank you.
Mark, can I come in to contradict on 2 points? To make it a
Por
bit
supuesto.
more
Of course.
exciting?
Genial.
First of all, I mean, there are people also in the Green Party who argue that, in a way, this election result is a disappointment because we didn't get more than 20%, and we should have. Let me answer ironically that this is one of the best disappointments that I've ever seen. Because first of all, it gave us a huge increase, voters coming from all quarters. We won voters from the socialists, from the left, from the liberals, and from the conservatives, and from the non-affiliated, who had not gone voting 4 years ago. So this is, and we expanded the outreach that we've had in the election quite substantially. Even where we're weak, like in East Germany, in Thuringia, we had the best result ever. So I think it's quite a good disappointment. And the second point I would like to make is on Annalena. People tend to say, and then everybody repeats that, Annalena's mistakes. Well, certainly she did make mistakes, but she also fought like a lion. She had great performances on TV. There have been many independent observers, pundits, who would argue that she won all the 3 major debates on TV. That's not what the spectators said, but that's what a lot of people felt. She had great appearances throughout the campaign. Her audiences figured in the 4 digits. So she had more than just a few campaign events where there were more than 1,000 people attending. That's quite exceptional in the history of the German Greens. Only one person has been doing that in the past. That was Joschka Fischer 20 years ago. And still, it is fair to say she made some mistakes, but I would argue that I've never seen a campaign completely without mistakes. And she was indeed targeted in a very special way. There have been analyses that say 75% of all the fake news that was underway on the web was directed against her personally. 75% of all the fake news. And I would say once the party finds the time is not today, because we have to prepare for the negotiations over forming the government. But once the party finds the time to really analyze, and we should, what went wrong, where could we have done better, I would predict that the result will not be, oh, that poor woman goofed up, but rather that we together had a couple of wrong priorities or wrong approaches, where we just have to understand that we have to get better. Give you one example. In Thuringia, the state in Eastern Germany where I tried to help the Greens, we had 11, that's probably our weakest state in all of Germany. We had 11.9% in the cities and 3.9% in the countryside. So basically in the countryside, we have been hated, and in the cities, we have been well accepted. And that is certainly not the result of just one woman making mistakes, possibly. This is a major task for the party. And the third point I would like to raise is on China. I believe that even if the next German government just listens to major industrial associations on China policy, it will change the China policy. Because today, the Chancellor's office is listening to Volkswagen and a few other multinational corporations, and that's why people talk about an automotive foreign policy. But when you listen to the Federation of German Industry or the Federation of the machine tool industry or the electrical industry, they're much more critical because they represent not that much the multinationals, but the small and medium-sized companies. And their perspective on China has been changing quite a bit. So this is not human rights versus business. This is, interestingly now, human rights plus a major sector from the business community versus the multinationals.
Bueno, gracias, Reinhard.
Okay,
No sé
thank
si
you, Reinhard. I don't know if María-Paz or Carme would like to add something to Reinhard's comments. Yes, I would like to add one thing. It has to do with Annalena Baerbock. Some newspapers, well, I don't have the exact figures, but you could tell the moment of maximum attacks, both in certain areas of the media and the press. Fake news, I'm speaking about. It was when the peak of the surveys showed that she could win. Then you could really see that toxic set of actions. You know, being a woman played a key role because the errors made, and there were errors made, they were quantified in a very exaggerated way. At the beginning, for example, she was constantly asked, how could she take care of her two daughters if she were the chancellor? Obviously, she's been the subject of very tough attacks during the campaign. But obviously, campaigns are like that, and obviously, a leader that may have possibilities in spite of her best possibilities. Well, she is negatively affected by the media. This is the task of the Greens to decide how to handle the situation. We will see how this will be done. Bless you. Well, I know it's a question more than a comment, but the fact that Havek now is the person that will take the step forward and that seems to be handling and managing the negotiations, well, it's not a big help to explanation to the, or it's not a way to explain that well, to tell you the truth, whoops, to tell you the truth, and I'll finish quickly. In the final lap of the campaign, well, her figure was emphasized and underscored. In the streets, we could see many posters of Anna-Lena on her, and then you could see the two of them on poster. The Greens, with the Greens, have very valuable people, not only one. That's why we could also see that she had been weakened during the campaign. I don't think the fact that well, he's taking a step forward, it's not bad, because now he's a figure, well, a more powerful and more mediatic figure. Well, maybe some people say, yes, he could have been the best candidate, but since we don't know what could have happened, well, why should we wonder what could have happened if he had been the first candidate? So I don't think this is something that is necessarily negative in terms of feminism. As Christian Lindner is a person who's made some sexist comments in the past, and he doesn't have, and this is, and his is, and well, the FDP is a very masculinized party, and physically Robert Habeck and Christian Lindner look very much alike. Physically they look alike. It seems like there is a dialogue between bodies, that Anna-Lena Baerbock is the strange person. Volker, well, looks like this type of man, 40-50 years, and not very thick beard. Well, it's a way, or it's a system of political communication or iconography or something similar. But I think that ultimately the important thing is that the negotiating teams are powerful, and Anna-Lena Baerbock is very powerful. And she's very strong, and Robert Habeck is as well. So I think that this will be good. It'll be good to see that the party uses its fullest potential.
I would argue that the great successes that we have had before this election campaign, starting in early 2018, when both Anna-Lena and Robert were elected co-leaders, have to a large degree depended on the collaboration of the two as a team. They were strong because they presented a united party that was not riven by internal differences, a party that was willing to open its arms, and two leaders that were not fighting each other, as had been the case in earlier times. Susanna knows that well. I've been the leader of the party for 6 years. It was different at the time. So this team spirit played a very positive role. And I think one of the failures that we suffered during the campaign was that we did not succeed in convincing the public that we did not break up the team to promote Anna-Lena and demote Robert, but that we were offering two number one people. I think that was the attempt. When they were presented in the party conference, they were presented as the two co-leaders of the campaign, of which one was supposed to become the chancellor if the fate would foresee that. And now I think the task for the party is again to return to the successful period of having a team of two co-leaders. And of course, some media now argue, well, she was number one, and now she's being demoted and he's being promoted, so he takes over as number one. This is not going to happen. I can tell you, it's not going to happen. That's now not how the Green Party works. And there are already quite a few voices inside the party and also in the public that say we're not going to play along with a game plan where the woman fights hard. Of course, she does make mistakes. So everybody else would have made mistakes too. And then after the fight is over, the men take over again. That's not going to happen. I also want to just clearly say this one thing. She was not selected the chancellor candidate just because she was a woman. That would not have been enough. She was chosen as the chancellor candidate because she was Annalena, because she was the woman with certain characteristics, with certain capabilities, with a lot of trust in the party. You should remember that in her last election, she had 97% of the vote. Nobody had ever any result comparable to that. So I think there are some awkward appearances there were during the campaign, but I would predict that the party will again pull together. The negotiating team will be consisting of 10 people, 5 from the Reale wing, 5 from the left wing. The whole team will be gender balanced and politically balanced. I would predict that this is not going to be, after a phase of transient feminism, the return to the big male leader. I think that's going to be a different story.
Susan, me ha parecido que querías hablar.
Susanne, you wanted to say something?
Well, maybe one really short sentence, because I think it's really something, and I think it's really appreciated in Germany. Somebody who has been elected with a really good result and gets on the stage and says, yes, I have made mistakes. I think this is a great, this is something I have not heard for a lot of politicians doing this. And I think this is something what is really important to be of the personality on this. So this is not really, I'm scared of, not on the party, and that I think even a lot of people in the country are thinking that it's good to have a woman there really, and if you see, like, she's not only being attacked to be a woman, also because she's another generation. And I think the really change what the two have made is to introduce also to be a team. This is something which is new in the political landscape also, and to say, well, we are not fighting against each other. And if we are, as long as we keep this spirit, I think this will be really really good for the negotiation and for everything what will come up. But let me ask you one question, Reinhard, as I have you not so open on the spot, and I think what is going on my head the whole time. When you have put all the things together, or not all the things, but mainly the things which separates liberals and Greens, I think there will be a lot of compromises to make. I hope that at the end, the big compromises are going to be made by the liberals and not so much by the Greens. But if there is not, just to ask you if there is another option, because everybody now is only talking about Semáforo, the Ampel, or the Jamaica, or the big coalition. If it's not possible that Green and the Liberals will find something what is really a common base, is there anything else possible? Is there another, do you think that because with all the experience you have, do you think there's another option, or Germany will be able to be ruled by a government which is in minority or something?
No, that's not going to happen. As Marx said, hic Rhodus, hic salta. We have to solve the contradictions, or everybody will go down the drain. Look, the Liberals 4 years ago negotiated for months with the CDU and us over a Jamaica coalition, and roughly 10 minutes before we came to a conclusion, they stood up from the table and ran away, saying, we don't want to be in that government. They cannot do a similar thing a second time. It cost them dearly. They cannot afford that. And Lindner personally cannot afford. He has to find a solution. Us are under a similar strain. Look, we've argued throughout the campaign that we have to be in government in order to shape the climate future of the country, to create a climate government, because this is the years where we have to sort of make the pertinent decisions. And then we say, oh, yeah, we should govern, but it's too difficult for us. We don't want to govern. And the socialists, it's only the fourth time since the Second World War that the socialists have won more seats than the Christian Democrats. Scholz pulled off a surprising success. He cannot waste that opportunity. He would be laughed out of the country. So everybody is under the same law, and that law says you have to be successful in negotiating, which means that everybody has to be willing to make compromises. So, for instance, give you an example. We would prefer to have new rules on the Stability and Growth Pact, more flexible rules. I guess the liberals will be completely opposed to that. Well, maybe the solution is to just keep the rules as they are and to accept that they're not being enforced. And this is a bit cynical and a bit pragmatic. And there will be, I would expect, there will be different achievements for different parties in coalition. We have to win big on climate. We have to win big on protecting children and helping families. So these have been two core issues for us. We can hardly strike an agreement where all of that comes to naught. The liberals have different priorities, and that will force us to be willing to make compromises where they will then boast of their own successes, and similar with the socialists. This is how it goes, and a lot of people will be disappointed. But I again want to recall the experience of 20 years ago. We went into coalition with the socialists at the time from a much weaker position. We had 6.7% of the vote then. Today we have more than double the number. We managed to have only 4 major goals inserted into the coalition contract: the nuclear phase out, an eco tax, changing the citizenship law of the land, allowing people born in Germany to become German citizens, and same-sex marriage. Those 4 major reforms were the price that we asked for to enter the coalition. We gave up on almost everything else. We gave up on pensions, we gave up on labor market, we gave up on economic issues. We stuck to our guns and we stuck to those 4 priorities. And those 4 priorities were enforced, and they have modernized the country. And today, with the exception of the extreme right, nobody is in favor of keeping nuclear. The green transformation is widely accepted. The citizenship law of the land is widely accepted. Same-sex marriage has been bolstered since then. So I think the expectation that everything will be red and green, and then a little FDP, a little liberals as best supporting character, that will not work. You have to find a way of respecting your partners and allowing them to be successful if you want to be successful yourself. in that kind of a coalition?
Bueno, muy interesante. Muy
Gosh, very
interesante.
interesting. Very interesting.
Las 5:30.
We had committed ourselves to finish at 5:30 in 2 minutes. Someone is asking, Joan is asking about the results of the Linke that surprised because they went down. I don't know if you had to just give your headlines, your hypothesis, Reinhard, why the Linke had such results. One sentence, not to
The scriptures says a house divided cannot stand. And the Linke has been a house divided not just once, but twice.
Es que no me veo capaz de hacer un titular corto.
I cannot make a short headline. The Linke family is so complex, so difficult to explain. I cannot. Well, they've been saved by the strength they have in some areas in the east. They've had at least 3 areas of their mandate that guarantees their presence in Bundestag. So many Germans still analyze Die Linke as the country that comes from the old RDA, and that's scary for many. But 2 weeks ago, I was in Erfurt, and I was talking to a communal politician, a green politician. He said, "Listen, negotiating 1,000 times with the Linke from the east, and then to negotiate with the Linke from the west, because the Linke in the east touch the power. They have worked in the government, and it's possible to reach commitments and a compromise. But in the other guys," he said, "are crazy. The Linke from the west are crazy." He said, interesting. In a survey that was made the same night, well, I saw a great scape of votes towards the socialists and the Greens, and there's a useful vote to parties that were strong. One could win, the other nearly, and they could be part of the government. And I imagine that this has had an influence, the vote that was hesitating in between one and the other. I'd like to thank you all for your kind participation. It's been so interesting. I've enjoyed very much. And about the coalition of governments and coalitions, there's a good sentence that says that when you are in the opposition, when you're in the government, you have problems. When you're in the opposition, you have one problem. And the Greens may have problems versus having just one problem, but it's not so easy to manage the situation you have ahead of you. Reinhard, all the best for the near future. María-Paz and Carmen, thank you for your collaboration. Bye-bye. True pleasure. Bye-bye. Thank you. Thank you.